Async functions introduced in ES8 are syntactic sugar over promises that make asynchronous code more readable, cleaner, and easier to write. They provide a straightforward way to work with asynchronous operations and handle asynchronous code in a more synchronous like manner without blocking the event loop. The main async function syntax introduces two new keywords, async and await. Let's look at the code. First, we create a method signature like we normally would. However, what changes here is we prepend the keyword async to the arrow function. This keyword indicates that the function will operate asynchronously and always returns a promise. Next, inside our method, we create a new variable, let's call it result, and say it's equal to the result of some asynchronous operation. Now we prepend the keyword await, which tells our application to essentially pause the execution of the function until the promise either resolves or rejects. This allows us to write asynchronous code that literally looks synchronous, much more readable and developer friendly, especially when it comes to chaining promises, which we'll look at in a minute. Finally, we just return our result. It's super simple, right? Let's look at a real example. Here we have a new async method that we'll use to fetch some weather data from an API. Inside this method, we'll define a response object, which will be the initial response we get from the server. Since we know this could take a minute, we'll use the await keyword here to ensure we aren't proceeding with the code until this call completes successfully. Next, we'll need to convert our response into readable JSON, which might also take a second depending on how large the payload is. So we'll use the await keyword here as well. If everything works as expected, we'll return that JSON data. Since we aren't using the promise constructor directly, we'll need to handle the reject state ourselves. For this, we use a traditional try-catch block. This allows us to say, generally, that if anything fails along the way, we want to catch that error and pass it on to whatever code is interested in this information. Now let's actually use our method and check out some weather info. First, we'll call our fetch weather data method. Next, we'll create our then method and pass in the data as its only parameter. Here, we simply log the data once it's available. Finally, we'll need to do something in the case of an error. So we create our catch method to simply log out the error if anything goes wrong. Now let's run it. All right, and we can see that that worked as expected. We get a JSON version of the data returned from the API. Looks great. Now, if we wanted to find more specific values, we can peruse through the object as we normally would. So let's say, for example, we were only interested in the description value here. Well, we can find that information the same way we'd find any specific object data in JavaScript. Data.weather at the 0th array index dot description. If we log this out. In summary, async functions in ES8 provide a simpler and more expressive way to work with asynchronous JavaScript code, making it easier to write and understand asynchronous operations using synchronous-like syntax. They are a powerful tool for managing asynchronous tasks in a modern JavaScript application.